got to know who you're talking with and make sure they like the military before you start pitching. Well, I was a Marine or I was in the Army. Like some people just, it's not for them. It's a free country. And you have to kind of know your audience. But there's a program, it's a nonprofit. It's called Veterans in Media and Entertainment. And I've been a part of that for probably about 9 years as well. And they have different opportunities. Now, I didn't leverage them for the opportunities with interning. That literally came from me sitting next to a guy at like UCLA's, their MBA programs, initiation, kind of like the intro. And I sat down next to him and he was like, yeah, I work for Bob Shea. And I was like, that name is familiar. And he's like, yeah, you want to come in tomorrow? And I start reading scripts and I'm like, sure, why not? And that's kind of how it worked for me. And his dad was an Army vet who served during the Vietnam era. I don't think he went to Vietnam, but so he was like, oh, you're a veteran? So he's like, that was like serendipitous. Like, didn't know the guy from Adam, which his name is Adam. Didn't know him from Adam, but it was like I just sat next to the right person. And sometimes life works out that way.
And that's the thing is, but it goes back to having a plan and putting actions in place and the importance of you had a goal. This is ultimately in the back of my mind. This is what I want to get to. I want to get to the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down the MBA route, but I was still thinking about this other side. And like you said, you never know who you're going to meet unless you put yourself in certain situations.
Correct. And showing up. People always talk about showing up, and it's like just being there. And that's happened to me many times in my career where it's like, I just need to be there. And if I'm there and it's like stuff does happen while you're there that wouldn't if you were not present. Your presence or lack thereof can highly distinguish what you're going to do.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this.
You've been to quite a few colleges. Do you have, and I say this jokingly, do you kind of have an identity crisis because you've gone to USC and UCLA plus Ohio State?
Well, I went there as an undergrad.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's an identity crisis. I mean, we don't even have to.
Who do you cheer for?
I cheer for the Buckeyes.
Okay.
I'm from Ohio. That's my Midwestern
Pull that
roots.
mic just a little bit closer to you.
That's my Midwestern roots. So, I'll make sure I stay in the bubble here around it.
You're from the Midwest, correct?
Yes.
Talk to me about where you grew up.
I grew up outside of Columbus, Ohio. Initially in Pickerington. Family moved to a town close by, Groveport, and then back to Pickerington. And, cornfields, car dealerships, cows, tractors, it's a good time, though. Friday night football, watching the Buckeyes on Saturday or Sunday, depending, I think. Trying to think if the basketball team plays on Sundays, but nonetheless, watching a lot of sports growing up, the Bengals, the Browns. At times during my youth, they were good. The Bengals went to the Super Bowl once when I was like really little, and then went again here a couple of years ago, which I was happy about. The Browns, they moved away and became the Ravens, and they came back, and everybody was supporting them, and they've had ups and downs. Unfortunately, we haven't seen them go back to the Super Bowl yet, or even go to a Super Bowl, although they won like an NFL championship back in like the 60s. So it was a while ago. I think that was against Vince Lombardi's Packers or something. So that's like decades and decades ago. It was very formative. A lot of hardworking people, a lot of union people. My family, a lot of veterans, which led to me being a Marine. My family has history back to World War II with my great-grandfather serving, and then my grandfather on my mom's side, he served in Korea and Vietnam. He did the Army and then the Air Force. Army, Korea, Air Force, Vietnam, and he retired.
Did you ever talk to him about why he made the switch?
He passed before I had the opportunity. I know he saw a lot of combat in Korea. I have a patch of his that was, I don't know if it was made by his mother, my great-grandmother. She lived almost, she was like 100 in the late 2000s. And she quilted a lot. And she had a patch, I got it through her, of his unit in Korea. And I've got it at home in my desk materials. I keep it. But it says like to hell and back, and has like skull on it, and it's pretty intense, a quilted piece. Again, I don't know who did it, but it was his unit. And I talked to some of the relatives, and they were like, yeah, he saw some serious combat in Korea, and I think it might have been in the Army National Guard at that point because they were that desperate for troops. And then he came back. I wanted to say he got off duty for a while and then went Air Force, probably like mid-50s, like 55, 56, and he was an aircraft maintainer for helicopters, so it was much more not front lines, not getting shot at, not watching your buddies die. And so that's my understanding of why why he likely made a switch. He was not around, and I didn't know that when I was a kid, and found those things after he'd passed.
Your dad serve?
He didn't. He went to private Catholic school, though, so he was like very disciplined, and he got... The instructors at Officer Candidate School, when I graduated, they asked him, "Are you a retired Marine, like a gunny or a lieutenant colonel?" He's like, "Oh no, I just went to Catholic school when they used to beat you." And
I've got more rules and regulations than you guys do.
Yeah. The Catholic Church, lots of rules and regulations. So yeah, he grew up around that and brought that. And he'd have been fine in the military. Like if he'd have done the Army or the Marines or whatever, he'd have been very disciplined. He'd probably have been a colonel or a senior enlisted or something, like first sergeant or sergeant major, because he's very, very
regimented.
100%. On time and like early and like make sure he gets stuff done. So
what did your dad do for a living?
Initially, he was a marketing exec. He worked for Anchor Hocking, which is a big glassware company. They were much bigger back up until the late 80s, and they got bought out during all those leverage buyouts and corporate raider things. He did that and was like I think, senior VP or just below the senior VP of marketing, which is very high up in the company. And then he was a marketing and sales exec for like another small but highly legitimate mid-sized firm in Ohio. They dealt with the military and oil and gas and a few other things. And then at the age of 45, he transitioned to follow his childhood dream to be a locomotive engineer and a conductor. So he spent 22 years on Norfolk Southern, retired as an engineer and a conductor.
When he made that transition, how old were you?
16. I could drive. I was getting ready, go to college. I was working at Wendy's, working the big job there in fast food, and I could handle myself and take care of the home and stuff when he was gone.
What did your mom think of that?
Well, at that point they were separated.
Oh, okay.
So she. I guess he could make his own call then, and if they'd still been together, she'd probably have been for it because he had laid out a plan of how to make the transition without, dipping into savings or being short. Like he did it very strategically, and coming from a business mindset, he could kind of see the runway he needed and the time frame it would be till he was back, making a similar salary, if not better, which he did. So the railroad actually, at least in Ohio at the time, paid very well, especially if you did it overtime and you worked a lot of the yard jobs. You could do very well for blue collar. And it was kind of interesting because the men he worked with, they were like, "Well, you have a degree. What are you doing here?" Like he's like, "Well, I just love trains," and he did, and they did too. But it was kind of shocking for some of the guys because they're like, "You outwork younger guys here. Like, how do you do that?" And he's like, "Well, get good sleep and disciplined," and all that regiment came back, and he used that in his second career.
Anybody else in your family in the railroad industry that kind of was a catalyst for him to go do that, or was that simply, "I like trains, I want to go do this"?
Primarily him just liking trains, but we did have some extended family, like I would say like a great uncle or like a married into the family or someone like that I'm drawing a blank on who it was, but they worked in the railroads in like the early 1900s, mid 1920s and stuff. So it was in the family lineage, but it wasn't like most of the people were union glass workers, or they were union welders, and they were based in like Lancaster, Ohio. So it was like small town America. And he was like really the first with like trains as a kid. And I grew up been on steam engines, and I've been on diesel locomotives and the Wild West train at Tucson, which I don't think it runs anymore, but it did when I was really young. They had it. And so I got to ride on that as a little kid. So lots of adventures with me going along on trains. And then it was a runaway train with John Voight and I think it's like Rebecca De Mornay. It's a mid-'80s movie. It was really good. I watched that as a kid and like not knowing exactly what all was going on, but there's trains in it and it's really well shot and like, close-ups and actions with, very, very heavy pieces of steel moving very fast down a train track. So, I guess some cinematic stuff there.
We'll definitely get into that portion of your life.
Yes, I know a little bit about that. That's true.
Do you have a big family, brothers, sisters?
I have an older brother, Mark. He's 11 years older than me, and he passed along a lot of 70s and 80s nostalgia.
Got it.
And so it was like I was in the 90s being like, man, these Star Wars toys are cool. Like, I have more of these when I was a kid, or I was growing up. And same thing with like Transformers and G.I. Joes and all that kind of 70s and 80s stuff. It was like I got to see the Rubik's Cube and the Simon game with like the lights, if you remember, and Trivial Pursuit. And then as a kid, vaguely, and probably just a blessing for my memory, I remember watching a lot of like 80s television. I must have been like 2 or 3, and like Magnum PI, Star Trek: The Next Generation, Jeopardy, like when Alec Trebek was like really young, and
all kind of influenced by just kind of hanging out with your brother.
Yeah, I mean, like he'd come home and he was 13, 14, 15, be like watching some TV or hanging out, and so you as a kid, most younger brothers are, that's the hero, that's
right.
the guy, and he gifted me all this, Star Wars stuff, Millennium Falcon and X-Wing and Optimus Prime figure that it was like one of my like favorite toys. And then the 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joes, which were big in the 80s, and those were, they had comic books and all kinds of stuff with them. And so getting all those things was like, oh, these are real toys, even though they're still kind of making some of them. It was, they were sacred toys just because your brother gave them to you.
You almost lived the 80s 2.0.
In a way, yes, because it was like I was in the 90s. I'm like, I've got like these, like, and they were worth a lot of money. You could take them to toy shows or sell them at yard sales, and people would buy Millennium Falcons and pay good money for them in the mid-90s because they weren't getting made like they are now by Kenner. And in the late 90s, they reintroduced a lot of that stuff when Lucas released the special editions. And I went to the theater and saw the first Star Wars special edition, and then saw Phantom Menace. Pretty sure I saw the Clone Wars. I saw like most of the prequels in theaters just because it was like, as a kid, this is what a movie's supposed to be. And Indiana Jones, I saw Last Crusade in theater with my brother, Ghostbusters 2, the Tim Burton Batman, which I was probably too young to see, but it was still like, wow, Batman's Batman. It's a pretty cool plane and a car he's got. That's all you really think of. And then like that Joker guy's crazy. And you're like, oh, it's Jack Nicholson. He's a great actor. As you get older, you realize who these people are. You see him in other roles, and you're like,
I recognize him.
Yeah, that guy looks familiar. He's really good at this. And so it was actually a small business I kind of developed with having my brother's collection of toys, and then I knew what stuff was worth because I was like, well, this stuff's worth quite a bit. And eBay had come out, and I collected myself in my own free time from like mowing lawns, washing windows, doing industrious stuff, becoming from the Midwest and having, a father who was a paper boy back in the day and had worked and continued to work very hard. It was like, kind of in the family genes. And
I was going to ask, with a dad who was regimented, I'm assuming probably fairly strict on you and your brother.
Oh, yeah.
Plus having a brother 11 years older, you were probably kind of already corralled into a pretty straight and narrow life, I'm guessing. Or did you kind of rebel a little bit?
I actually did not rebel. There were 2 different homes. My mother being more artistic, although she was big on history, she was more laid back and had more outside the box things.
Got it.
Whereas my father would be more like a Jimmy Stewart, Robert Duvall type of character, if there was one, if that were to exist. And so it was more strict. We still had family cookouts and went to like a church every Sunday. But my mother was much more of a free spirit, so I got to see 2 sides of life. And I chose the more straight and narrow path because for me it worked better and it was easier to function in. Order worked for me, my personality, even though I'm like more creative, like that order in some things was like healthy. And when I went to the Marine Corps, like some parts of the Marine Corps were less strict than what I was used to. Now the PT and obviously the marching and the drill and those things were very much, I was used to like that type of a discipline. But there's just some other things where I'm like, this is more laid back than what I was used to in the Midwest. Interesting, So there was those 2 different worlds, and I was able to navigate both of them successfully, and I probably more of a mixture of both as an adult. I like to go out and have fun, and I've golf and go to the beach and those things, and I've paraglided before, and I've done some more risque things. I need to go still parachute myself, and maybe do some scuba diving. But I do enjoy quiet time. I enjoy just chatting with friends or going out for a nice dinner. And low key, I think is the best way to put it. Some people might think it's boring or something, but it's like I'm low key. I'll have fun at certain points, and then I'm focused on work or the Marine Corps now. And it's like that disciplined, where I like to see stuff get pushed through and completed. And once that stuff's done, then you have fun. You go out and do things, and I'll vacation different places and go back home and stuff.
And I would imagine, and we'll get into this, with you still being in the reserves, active reserves.
Yes.
That kind of puts some barriers on how far, I'll loosely call it, how wild you could get.
Correct. It is, because you have that still in your mind, like, well, I've got drill coming up. I've still got to maintain physical fitness. I've still got to do these things. And yeah, I can't be operating outside of what's still like active duty Marines do. Like I have to follow Marine Corps orders. Right. I have to follow their traditions and the culture. So yeah, it's broader than it is on active duty for sure, but there's still the guardrails are just further out.
Right. As a young man and a young boy in high school, or a young man in high school, what were your aspirations for adulthood?
I don't think I'd figured it out by then. I mean, I did journalism classes in high school and was like going out being like a reporter and coming up with little stories and stuff. And I'm sure that led into the journalism I do now, although I'm much more serious and much more entertainment and military focused. But there was those classes I took. It was on WPIC, the cable show. And I would borrow stuff from like Conan O'Brien or Jay Leno and go out and do Joel walking, where I'd ask people questions like who's the current president and, things like that. Just in SNL skits, I would borrow from them. I mean, it was fun. My teacher let me get away with, I'd say, a fair amount of things. Nothing egregious, but it was fun stuff. I took some theater classes and enjoyed them. But, it was... I had a certain core group of friends, some of which were from like the age of 5. So I was very loyal and had those friends and people I hung out with, and went out to parties and stuff maybe once a month. But I was pretty low key, pretty regimented, and I was working at 16 to 18. I was like about 25, 30 hours a week during school, which is a pretty heavy workload for a kid.
Sports during high school?
I played soccer and basketball growing up, but I did not. I guess I checked out of that one. I put my sports effort into being a Marine when I got older, and that's where I was. And maybe that's better, because a lot of people get injuries and stuff when they're younger, which bars them from service because they had reconstructive knee surgery or ankle surgery, and it's like, the Marine Corps doesn't want somebody with plates in their ankle. So I missed some things there, but I was able to certainly make that up in the Marine Corps athletic environment for sure.
When did the military hit your radar? In the sense of you actually serving. We've obviously talked about your family's lineage serving.
Probably when I was like maybe 7 or 8, I kind of recognized that with my grandfather on my mom's side, and then recognized it with a lot of my uncles on my dad's side. They were Vietnam and Korea vets. One was a World War II vet, like the end of World War II into Korea. And, you kind of around them, you hear some stories, and you see some of their patches up on their wall or their ribbon rack, and you're like, that's interesting. And they tell you some things they want to share, other stuff they didn't. Even as I got older, they still didn't really want to share it, understandably so. And that hit my radar, and you have G.I. Joe toys, and you've got Bruce Willis movies and Arnold Schwarzenegger. You got all these kind of action stars where they were playing military people or cops, or it was a very distinct time. Von Damme and Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris. They have like a military or CIA or some type of a law enforcement background, and so that always intrigued me. I'm like, okay, cool. So that's what real police officers do. They fight German terrorists in an office tower in Los Angeles, and that's it. Yeah, I'm sure that happens.
Every cop has experienced that. They just happen to film one aspect of it in a movie.
They caught that. It was actually reality television.
It actually was. It was the first real documentary ever made.
In Los Angeles with the FBI involved,
yes.
And a police chief who didn't know what was going on or whatever. It was like Paul Gleason's character. He's like on a bullhorn. They're cutting out the lights. It's like the lights are getting cut out. Classic stuff. The principal from Breakfast Club. Anyways, but so growing up around that, I hit my radar probably when I was around 7 or 8, really kind of processed it. And read a lot of history books growing up, was really fascinated with World War II, and then Vietnam as well, especially with family members involved in it. And again, they got to hear certain things of it and see some of their uniforms. And then after September 11th, I mean, that really, a lot of people were definitely woke up to like, okay, well, the military is really something important, you know.
What year did you graduate high school?
2002. So that actually happened.
Just after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was homesick that day. I woke up, had like a sore throat, and was like, just did not feel well. And went downstairs and turned on the TV, and like Tom Brokaw's crying, and it took me like about a good 5 minutes of like, what is this? Like I thought it was like a movie or something, you know, or like I just didn't process. Like I called my parents, called my grandmother, and like I think I even called my brother and was like, hey, what's going on? Like it looks like we've been attacked, and very, very tragically and highly egregiously. And so that definitely kind of put it in there. I looked at the reserves in college, and you know, had family, and even prior enlisted people were like, "Don't do the reserves. Go in as an officer once you graduate fully, and you'll be a lot better off." Like, okay, and I went and did that, and then graduated in 2007 and went off to OCS.
So when you went to Ohio State, what did you study?
A theater.
Thinking that'll transition wonderfully to the Marine Corps.
Well, I mean, Jimmy Stewart was an actor, and Kirk Douglas was an actor. I mean, there was a Tyrone Power. There was a lot of golden era Hollywood stars that had been actors and then went into World War II and successfully served, and then some of them continued, like Jimmy Stewart and Tyrone Power, and there was others who did too. I think Glenn Ford did. Well,
you mentioned the Star Wars movies, and forgive me because I don't remember his name, but one of the recent Star Wars movies, the gentleman that was in the Marine Corps and now is an actor,
Adam Driver. Yeah.
So
yeah, he was stationed at Pendleton, I believe.
Were you? I mean, I'll ask this jokingly. Were you actually thinking of transitioning from theater to the Marine Corps and thinking that would have a significant benefit for you, or was just theater an interest of yours?
Theater was an interest of mine and a passion. And as a kid, probably the most impactful cinematic moment, or I should say one of my best memories as a kid, was the Richard Donner Superman came on TV, and I think it was the 3-hour TV version, which has all this like deleted scenes and stuff, and more Lex Luthor, and more shots of Christopher Reeve doing stuff. And I saw that as a kid, and I must have been about 3. I was like really young, and we were in our home in Ohio out in the country, and I remember watching it on our TV that had the knobs that went, you know, you had to do the VHF and the UHF, and I was watching it, and like I was just fascinated by it. Like I was watching, I was like the guy really does look like he's flying. And my brother picked me up and carried me around the room, like, you know, a little kid, and he actually did my hair like Christopher Reeve. He actually put water and put a little curl, and so it was a very, very wholesome moment and very touching moment as a kid. And I was like, and so I think that kind of stuck with me. And then watching so many other things growing up, and you know, I mean, Fox TV coming on, and like cable kind of becoming a big thing. And I mean, I watched enough Nick at Night as a kid, watching Dragnet and Bewitched, and like shows that had been off the air for 15 or 20 years even then, you know. And so just those things led to me wanting to do acting. And then I hadn't really figured it out even in high school, like I said. And in college I was doing journalism for the first 2 years, and was like, yeah, I think I want to go do some acting. Like just something I want to do there. And, you know, applied to Ohio State and got in, transferred in. And this professor named Joy Riley, she's retired now. She's from Ireland. And she ran a new works lab. And like every other Saturday, like once or twice a month, they would meet Saturday mornings at like 10 a.m., maybe even 9 a.m. And you could go there for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and you would come in with scenes you had written for either a play you wanted to do, or your own monologue. You wanted to do like a one-man or one-woman show. You know, you could be writing up a short film. And she always had it open. Like, you can come into New Works on a Saturday, and we'll run your scenes, and we'll discuss it. And so I started going in, and she took a liking to me, and I was like, oh, you know, I'd like to write a Western. She's like, a Western? I love Westerns. You don't see them much anymore. You know, she was right. You don't. And she's like, well, what's it about? And is it a play? I was like, yeah, maybe like Sam Shepard's True West. I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Shepard is a great playwright.
I mean, I've heard the name.
Did you ever see Black Hawk Down?
Yeah.
Okay, you remember the general who oversaw, like the older guy with this? Okay, that's Sam Shepard. He's since passed, but he was an actor, and he was a playwright, and he wrote True West and a lot of other great stuff. And True West on Broadway, I believe it starred Gary Sinise and John Malkovich. I could be wrong about that. I can't remember who was on when it came out in the mid 80s, but it was like a famous like contemporary Western play about, I think Gary Sinise might have been the screenwriter, and then the other brother was a criminal. I think that was Malkovich. Again, I could be wrong on who exactly it was, but it was like a prominent play there in New York City. I'd read that when I was in theater school, and I'm like, this is interesting. Maybe I can come up with something. And being a fan of The Searchers and Josie Wales and Tombstone and so many other ones, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance as well, and that's got Jimmy Stewart and Lee Marvin and John Wayne, and that was a favorite of mine. And pitched it to Joy and was like, how about a period Western, like deals with like contemporary societal issues? And she's like, well, okay, well, what do you want to deal with? I was like, well, let's deal with like domestic violence and racism and alcoholism and things that affect the Midwest, and they affect everywhere, but things that affect the Midwest. And you have people who, they put up the picket fence, but it's not reality. And you know, people pay attention to what they see sometimes, but don't want to look behind the curtain. They don't want to find the Wizard of Oz because they'd rather not know about it. And so that's what this was kind of like appearances versus like, you know, what really happens. And so I set the play in like 1907, and it was about an hour long. I almost like did it purposely like a episodic, like Gunsmoke or Bonanza or something. Like it was really quick. And we had 2 on-stage gun battles. We had a bar fight. We had a stunt choreographer come in and work with us. And we were, before all that, I wrote the play and I submitted it to Joy. And she's like, I'll take this to the board of the theater department and we'll see what they say. And she came back and was like, yeah, we were able to get $7,000 for you and your, like a small, you know, a Midwest university that had a good theater department, but was not like an NYU or a USC, or they've got an endowment that's probably $1 billion. Like this is Ohio State. They're engineering and business and medicine and those things. And yeah, theater, but it's not their like kind of niche thing that everyone knows them for.
It really sounds though, in listening to you talk, that what drove you more was not necessarily the acting aspect, but the telling of the story aspect and having the control over being able to dictate the storyline.
True. I mean, I was auditioning for other plays and you know, got into some of them and I was in the theater acting studio classes and had some really great professors, people who'd worked in like off-Broadway and worked in television. You know, they were legit professionals, and was able to still act. But yes, the being able to tell a story was important to me. And then I was able to play a role in it. I was one of the leads in it, and we hired like professional actors. And the bad guy, Mark Collison, I haven't talked to him in years. He kind of played a Lee Marvin character, and he nailed it. Like people were like, "Yo, who's that guy? That guy's like a great bad guy." I'm like, "Well, it's Mark. He's like a super nice guy, but he can play, you know, a Lee Marvin, get passive aggressive kind of bully, menacing bully, very well." And so he was the, you know, the showdown at the end was with him. No surprise. And you know, we touched on, we had a domestic violence coordinator come in, and you know, things that either I had seen or my friends, I'd had some friends who had some rough childhoods themselves, and we were able to integrate that into the play, and we sold out 6 out of 7 shows. And it was a new Works Lab, so there was like maybe 65 chairs, but hey, 65 people coming to see even 6 shows, so that's like 360, maybe 400 people. Okay, I must have got some interesting, you know, people interested. Friends growing up came and watched it, and like one of my best friends from childhood and his dad came, and they love Westerns. Like, this is cool. And like they really enjoyed like the bar fight right in front of them. Like it was right in front of them, people flipping over tables, and you know, the guns we weren't able to use blanks. We probably could have if we were outside, like Tecumseh. Have you ever heard of Tecumseh? It's a staged Western play in Ohio about Tecumseh, a Native American hero. Right. It's worth seeing if you're ever in Ohio. Like, it's really cool. They're bringing in horses and like riding through and, you know, shooting off cannons, and you're like, it's like you're watching Dances with Wolves.
Do they hand out ear protection at the start of it?
I believe they do, actually. They might even get iPro now because like stuff's flying around. I mean, like people are back flipping off of horses, and you're like, this is like the last of the Mohicans, except right in your theater. And so, you know, all that was like right in the audience faces on purpose, and it was supposed to be very visceral. And you know, that, I mean, I've loved Westerns since I was a kid, and that was like a dream come true. And then the Marine Corps was coming up, and there was a calling to go do that from the family, seeing all the people that served, you know, 60, 70 years back.
So through the entire time while you were at Ohio State, your plan was, though, at graduation, you were going to go in The Marine Corps.
Yep.
How did you choose the Marine Corps?
I looked at the different branches and like what different ones offered. And I looked at Army Special Forces. I looked at their Army program. I was considering that, and then I went and talked with the Marine recruiter, and I'm like, I'm going to go with this one. I don't need a bonus. I don't need, it's like, I'm going to try this one. This one's a no frills, no BS. This is what's going to happen, and you're going to change or you're going to not. You're going to grow up. You're going to be different. You're going to be a leader or not. There's no gray area. And I was like, okay, having come from a home life I'm like, okay, I can deal with.
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah, I'm like, I can deal with that. You either do it or you don't. And you can do it. You just got to work hard at it. Okay, I can handle that. And it, definitely was a challenge. Definitely was, a humbling experience and a life-changing experience for the better. And I got to meet so many different people and work with so many different cultures and make me well-rounded. At least I like to think that.
Did you do ROTC while you were in college?
I didn't. Looking back, that would have been a definite yes. I would have done ROTC. And the ROTC people helped me get ready for OCS. I connected with them, and some of the Marine options were like, okay, we're doing a hike today, and here's how you do PT, and here's some shortcuts on getting better at pull-ups and the run time. And like, you need to do this and get these shoes. And like, they didn't know me from Adam, but they were like very helpful and taught me a lot in a very short period of time, because it was like the play went up in March, it was done, I had to turn in a thesis, and I was like PTing, running 6-8 miles a day, sometimes at like 10 o'clock at night to get ready for officer candidate school. And I think they called me up and offered and said, hey, if you can graduate early, which I did. I graduated like 7 or 10 days early. If you can graduate early, we'll get you to OCS. And so I actually got to OCS before my birthday. I didn't tell anybody it was my birthday there because you don't want to get hazed. Right. I just kept my mouth shut, and I was like, this is interesting. This is one heck of a birthday gift. What did I sign up for? And,
what year did you go in?
2007.
And straight off to Quantico for OCS?
Mm-hmm.
And at that time going in, two questions. What were you hoping to do, or what were you planning to do? And then were you planning a career?
The plan was to do 3.5, maybe 4, and get out. And that one thing I wanted to touch on, the Joy Riley, her husband was a Marine in Korea, and he looked like Sean Connery. And she told me that at one point, and I went to her office. I wanted to connect this as the Marine thing, because she wrote a letter of recommendation for me for the Marine Corps.
Oh, okay.
So I had an Irish theater professor who was like, he did a Western, he's very resourceful. He can do lots of different things. I'm sure the Marines were like, Western, what? What's the guy talking about? Like, maybe he needs to go work on a cattle ranch or something. Like, I don't know what this guy is. Or Old Tucson. And she had a picture up of him in her office from probably the 80s, and he was standing on like next to a stone fence. It looked like Sean Connery.
In a Marine Corps uniform.
Well, no, he had his apple cap on.
Oh, okay.
He hadn't been a Marine probably, for probably 30 years before that photo, or 25 years. But he still looked sharp, and he was in like the it looked like Sean Connery clothing. He looked like Sean Connery. And I was like, he really does look like him. And she's like, well, yeah, you think I was lying to you? That's why I married him. So he's a Marine, Sean Connery. And the guy also was, he could sing. And I was like, it sounds like he's like a Broadway star who missed his calling. Nonetheless, to go back to your question, the plan was to do 3 or 4 years, get out, and I was looking at like, maybe I should apply to like a classical stage program, or like, Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, or London Academy of Music and Dramatic, like something that was overseas, because I was always a big fan of a lot of the classically trained actors. You
were thinking that for after your 4-year stint?
Mm-hmm. I was really considering that. And, what got me interested in acting, which it took a while to germinate. You ever heard of the show The Equalizer?
I believe so.
Denzel does the film's versions
from
of
like the 80s. There was an English actor.
That's right.
Drove Jaguar.
That's right. Yeah. Edward Woodward was his name, and he was in Breaker Morant, which is a famous story about a Australian, I think he was a major commander who basically became a scapegoat for some activities that happened during the Boer War.
I want to go back just a little bit.
Yeah.
In talking to you, you can tell that you are very much passionate about the history of films and movies.
Right.
And you mentioned that your mom was artistic. Did your mom bring the love of movies and really appreciating what a movie told and the story and the acting?
Both my parents did. But yeah, I watched more stuff with her. I spent more time with her as a kid. she was more into like Roman history and Greek history and Latin and those types of like, the Egyptians. And so that's probably where a love of history comes from. And she has a similar mind to where she could recall certain things about movies, and like she knew about stars and stuff. And some of the stories she told me as a kid, which I don't know if she read in the Enquirer or she knew people in like Hollywood, which I don't think she did. She would talk about, and then as I've gotten older, I research. I'm like, it actually was true. Like what she said, about this actor or that actor. I'm like, huh, interesting. Or Marilyn Monroe this. Like look it up. Like, okay, it's kind of like a common thing about Marilyn. Okay, so she was kind of like a Wikipedia herself about those things. And so there was that. Watched like Silence of the Lambs with her, which scared the crap out of her or me as a kid. I'm like, that guy's a really good actor. Like Anthony Hopkins, I'm like, that guy's really good. He's scary, but I'm like, I'm fine. I can survive. I watched Terminator 2 and like all the Lethal Weapons and True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I remember when that came out as a kid, and we were watching that on we got it from Blockbuster or something, Do
you remember looking back on it, even back then as a young boy, really kind of breaking it below the surface and really evaluating the acting that was done as opposed to just mindlessly watching a movie?
Yeah, some of that started to come probably when I was around 10 or 12. Like looking like, yeah, that's some really like Edward Woodward. I watched like A&E at like my grandmother's home after school or something, and like he would come on and do The Equalizer. And I mean, the conventions of the show are certainly mid-'80s television on like CBS or something, you can tell. But growing up, it's like that guy stands out as an actor. Like he's believable and pretty threatening as like a guy in his mid-50s, and he's going around with a Walther PPK like Bond or something, taking out the trash in New York City. You're like, I like this guy. He's an advocate, and he doesn't take any crap from anybody. Like he's really smart, and there's a class to him that was even stood out for that period, which a lot of the old stage actors had, and like Patrick Stewart has it still, and David Suchet does, and some of them who are of that similar era, or a little bit after. Alec Guinness certainly had it, and he stuck out in Star Wars. Like when I watch those, I'm like, that guy's very distinct. Like, who is he? I know he's British, but I'm like, what's the story there? And so those were like kind of the things that pushed me like towards that. I think later on, or once I maybe got some more confidence or more of an understanding of like, okay, this is what I want to do.
What was your mom's feeling or desires for you, or was she supportive of you wanting to go in the military? She was supportive of
my acting pursuit. She understood that. She liked the creative side and was like, yeah, that's great. And she enjoyed the theater or the play as well, and she loved westerns and stuff. She spent time as a kid growing up in Texas in like the 60s, and so she was very much had a Texas western kind of thing that she enjoyed. And she was in support of the Marine Corps. She was concerned, as I think any parent would be, wanting their kids going off to a military service known to be the front lines during two wars that we were not going very well at that point, and we're having insurgencies and having to plus up troops. She was concerned, just like my father was, and just like even family members of mine who went to Vietnam were like, watch your butt over there, boy, and here's some tips from me when I went to Vietnam. And I was getting like insider points from like enlisted guys who'd done a year in Vietnam, and I'm like, that's a good idea. I think I'll listen to the sergeant. Well,
in 2007 there were quite a bit of stories and stuff coming back about the severity of combat that we were experiencing.
Yes, and the troops going and doing 2 and 3 and 4 deployments and then coming home and having a hard time transitioning out, which is completely normal. Like you literally just spent 3 or 4 years of your life over a 5 or 6 year period in a war zone. Like it's not easy to come home and just come right out of. So yeah, those were, there was concerns there from both my parents, and it's totally understandable. I hope I didn't give them too many gray hairs, but
What was your MOS going in?
Initially, I was air defense, Stinger missiles, low altitude air defense, and I had that MOS for a while. And on the reserve side, there isn't really a lot of opportunities for that MOS. It's shrunk because we were fighting a ground war in the mid-2000s, and it's like, why do we need... This is my sense of it. They were more likely like, why do we need air defense? We need more infantry. We need more military policemen. We need more artillery. We need more ground troops. So it seemed like the Marine Corps shifted and had more of those troops. And so the air defense community shrunk. Even on active duty, it did. And so I went over to the reserves and just worked in operations. And eventually, I can get to it a little bit later, but I did retrain. I've got a few. I mean, the last 2 years, I've picked up 4 new MOSs, and likely
by choice or
by choice, and it was some of it by passion. But I can get to that later. I mean, it's a big jump. That's literally like from 2007 to like 2021. So,
what was the catalyst for the pivot from active duty to reserve, and when did that happen?
It was. I recognized I still wanted to do something in entertainment. I didn't know exactly what. I thought about acting, and I'm like, man, that's a real tough way to go. And I just, for all the training I got and all the experiences, I guess I was kind of gun shy, or kind of like, maybe I don't know if that's the right thing or not. And I wanted to try out some different stuff. And, I did a couple of sets of orders out of the reserves, and served in New Orleans, and had a great experience there, and served in Tampa, had a great experience there, and then was able to get into grad school. I mean, I was doing something to keep the lights on and keep, my mind active, and keep, instead of stopping dead in the water and just doing straight grad school stuff. And then they're like, why don't you have a job? Or like, what are you doing? You can say, well, I'm still a Marine, which is true. And, I looked and was like, what? I was like, is there like an MBA? Is there a business program? And maybe it's mixed with like a MFA, like a Master's of Fine Arts. And there was one, which like I didn't apply to. It was pretty intense. Maybe I should have gone back and done that. But nonetheless, I'm like, I'll do an MBA, and then maybe I'll take like film classes, or like do some creative stuff on the side. I'll learn business, because I know that entertainment, it's show business, not show friends. Right. You want to have your friends working with you, but it's business. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll learn the business aspect, because I know how to write, or at least I thought I did. I guess as a novice writer, I wrote a play, but I look back at it, I'm like, boy, I could really do a lot better than this now. And I applied to different grad schools, and I got waitlisted by some and dinged by others, as you always do. It's kind of a crapshoot. And then I was lucky enough to get accepted into UCLA's MBA program.
And what year was that?
2014. It came in for the spring of 2014. I was like, oh wow, this is great.
Were you already on the West Coast?
I was in Tampa. I was based in Florida at that point at a Marine Central Command. And I was part of CENTCOM. CENTCOM is over the Middle East. And it was an intense job. I made a lot of good friends there and learned a lot. And, had to move from Florida to Los Angeles. And it was a good time. I drove cross country. At the time, I was driving a Bullitt Mustang, which was like the 40-year commemorative of Steve McQueen's car. McQueen was a Marine, so I enjoyed his movies growing up. Great Escape, seeing that stuff on AMC and Turner Classic Movies and this stuff.
I know the Fast and Furious people will argue, but I think the bullet chase scene is still probably the best chase scene in movie history.
I would agree with that. And number 2 would be, and he just passed away, William Friedkin's French Connection with Gene Hackman, who also is a Marine and who's still alive. He was driving that Pontiac Le Mans or something underneath the L there in Chicago or New York City. Yeah, like that's another great chase scene. I mean, you're watching that and you're like, man, you're going to hit somebody? Like you're on the edge of your seat. But yeah, I've watched that bullet chase scene enough times in my life, and even YouTube, the algorithm figured out to suggest to me current, bullet chase scene versus current day San Francisco, and I even sat through 13 minutes of that watching, like, that's pretty cool. It looks different. Okay, all right. I guess trivial knowledge, but still, it was a neat, break from my work, watching the current status of what the bullet chase scene looks like in present day.
When you made the move out here to California and you started a business master's program, what were you thinking was going to be the after effect of going through that program? I mean, I know you mentioned potentially taking some film classes on the side, almost like as electives.
Yes.
But was your plan to leverage was it an MBA program?
Yep.
To leverage that to still work your way towards the movie industry?
Yeah, being a producer, being some type of executive, working with veterans in the industry, making their projects come to life, or collaborating with them on a project, and bringing that to the silver screen. That was like the end state. That was like my essay, which probably helped get me into UCLA. They probably looked at it like, okay, this guy does have a direction where he wants to go. And they, that school offered all kind of different opportunities, consulting and banking and regular finance and marketing. And I was like, I'm really just interested in movies. I'm sure I'm like everybody else who gets off the bus here in LA thinking, I'll just be Steven Spielberg tomorrow. I recognized there was a long pathway. I mean, that was 9 years ago. we started school about 9 years ago in September, so it was a while ago. And it was, interning at different film companies. And one of the students I met and became friends with worked at Unique Features. Bob Shea ran that company. He founded New Line, and he produced all the Lord of the Rings, all the Nightmare on Elm Streets, the Blade movies. I got to meet him, and the first thing that came across my mind is he'd produced the Ninja Turtle movies, which the first one was the last film Jim Henson worked on before he passed away. And it was like, I saw that as a kid, and that was like a foundational movie. Ninja Turtles were huge at that point. And I remember shaking his hand. I was like, hey. He's like, oh, hi, I'm Bob. Nice to meet you. I'm like, oh, hey, Mr. Shea. I'm like, and in my mind, it was like, I guess a kid moment, like, this guy made the Ninja Turtle movies. Like, and I knew all the other big films and Oscar-winning stuff he made, but that's what stuck out. I'm like, I reflect on it, like, yeah, I guess that was a star-struck kind of moment in a way, and showed where my mind was at and what I was interested in. And so, I did the business school classes, and I worked on short films with UCLA students and AFI students, and got to, have different experiences on small sets. Worked as like an intern on a feature, an indie feature. And it was a kids movie called Time Toys. Learned a lot there. Got to work in different departments and stuff and help out and see what was going on. I played an extra in the movie, played a scientist, so I got to actually have some screen time. No lines, no dramatic acting, no Alec Guinness. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Nothing that cool. But nonetheless, those were some of the experiences in grad school where I guess a lot of other students were, they were focused on a corporate career, and that's great. I don't know, it didn't exactly feel right for me. I kind of operate on a gut sense and kind of intuition, and I try to listen to that more and more as I get older. And I was like, I want to keep going this route.
For somebody who might want to go down that same path and putting yourself back then in their shoes today, and they want to kind of do what you did, do the interning route.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to, well, first, did you leverage your veteran status to kind of open some doors? And
yes.
How should somebody use that leverage if they want to kind of start getting their foot into the entertainment industry?
Absolutely. And it's important to, you got to know who you're talking with and make sure they like the military before you start pitching, well, I was in a Marine or I was in the Army. Some people just, it's not for them. It's a free country. And you have to kind of know your audience. But there's a program, it's a nonprofit, it's called Veterans in Media Entertainment, and I've been a part of that for probably about 9 years as well. And they have different opportunities. Now, I didn't leverage them for the opportunities with interning. That literally came from me sitting next to a guy at UCLA's, their MBA programs, initiation, kind of like the intro. And I sat down next to him, and he was like, yeah, I work for Bob Shea. And I was like, that name is familiar. And he's like, yeah, you want to come in tomorrow and start reading scripts? And I'm like, sure, why not? And that's kind of how it worked for me. And his dad was an Army vet who served during the Vietnam era. I don't think he went to Vietnam, but so he was like, oh, you're a veteran? So he's like, that was serendipitous. Didn't know the guy from Adam, which his name is Adam. Didn't know him from Adam, but it was I just sat next to the right person. And sometimes life works out that way.
And that's the thing is, but it goes back to having a plan and putting actions in place, and the importance of, you had a goal. This is ultimately in the back of my mind. This is what I want to get to. I want to get to the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down the MBA route, but I was still thinking about this other side. And like you said, you never know who you're going to meet unless you put yourself in certain situations.
Correct. And showing up. People always talk about showing up, and it's just being there. And that's happened to me many times in my career where it's I just need to be there. And if I'm there and it's stuff does happen while you're there that wouldn't if you were not present. Your presence or lack thereof can highly distinguish what you're going to do. I was definitely lucky. I was definitely blessed in having doors open and meet people. One of the individuals I met while I was interning at Unique Features, there was a DeLorean parked down in the parking garage, and this was on the 9200 West Sunset building. It's a building with blue windows. It's kind of famous there in LA, at least in the Beverly Hills area.
Did it have a flux capacitor?
It didn't, but mine did. But nonetheless, I saw it. I'm like, okay, that's not my car. I didn't know that, but I'm like, interesting. And I put I had a UCLA business card and explained who I was. And I got an email the next morning. Hey, and it was a guy by the name of Riley. He's like, hey, I saw your card and stuff. Let's get together for lunch. And what do you? And so we got together and explained to him I was a Marine, and he was from Detroit, Michigan, and his family was a bunch of union people, and he had veterans and stuff, and so we hit it off, and he was the head of development for Mosaic and Jimmy Miller, and Jimmy Miller was the manager for Jim Carrey and helped make Jim Carrey a star. So this guy was like, big time comedy manager, producer, and I think Riley worked on Elf, and he's worked on like almost every Will Ferrell movie for a long time as like an executive or like, something in producing or production. And so we had, a nice lunch. I learned more about him. I mean, that was like total serendipitous. A guy who works in comedy, who's like, is a legit exec at like a legit producing company that worked with Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly and all these other people, Jim Carrey and stuff, at least earlier. I just left a note on his car, and that, I still interact with him, at different points in the industry. I mean, he's busy with producing his own stuff and, producing stuff for Jimmy, but nonetheless, it's like, me just leaving that card on the car and being like, I mean, he could have been somebody totally different. He could have been a aerospace guy, or he could have been working in real estate or something and just had the car because he liked it. No, he was a movie buff just like me, and he was from the Midwest, and he, came from like a union family background. So I'm like, okay, I can connect with this guy. And, I was an intern there for about 5 months and read a bunch of comics and scripts, and I read like early versions of like The Stand, which is like the Stephen King miniseries that came back out. And I saw the original one as a kid in the 90s. It had I think it had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and it was one of the characters who was like carrying a sign saying the world will end. Nonetheless, it was a good
very tall sign.
Yeah, it was it was definitely very tall for Kareem. And then moved on, and I went and did short films, and then I got to do the internship with the Time Toys film, and it continued working, and then finally I just kind of hit like a point where I'm like, man, I don't know what I want to do. And I ran into the same guy.
At any point during this or through this process, you're doing the MBA program, you're interning. Is any of it paid work from the movie making side of it, or is it strictly all just your volunteer time? It was I got credit for it.
But majority of those, that's how those programs work. They're credit only. But kind of to suck it up. I got like free lunches, and I got like free coffee and shirts and like breakfast and stuff and meals. So I wasn't like, not paid something. I got opportunities to see films and things that you wouldn't get to see, and being on conversations that, again, if you're not there, you don't get to hear them. So those were, intangibles, but yeah, the free food and, getting taken care of in that respect. I'm like, okay, well, I've got the GI Bill. I can afford this for now. I can stick my head in and get this experience that, a lot of people don't or can't afford to. And it's like, okay, that deployment to Afghanistan, this was not the intent. I didn't go to Afghanistan thinking, I'm going to use my GI Bill. It was like, I want to go serve my country. And I'm still proud I did that, regardless of how that situation turned out over there.
Going back to your active duty time, was there ever a point where maybe there was a mind shift that you thought maybe you might do a full career active duty? Or did you pretty much...
I knew I still wanted to be involved in the Marines because I enjoyed the camaraderie and the sense of purpose and the values. Full active duty career, no. Okay. I'd say even like on a gut sense, I'm like, no, I need to go do some stuff that's more creative and like go back to what I was doing before the Marines, and even in the Marine Corps, I was known as like the Rain Man for like movies, and like I can do like a lot of impressions and pretty good ones, at least so I've been told. And we would do those in Afghanistan. Like I served with British officers over in Afghanistan, British and Scottish and Irish, from those nationalities there in Great Britain. And, we had free time, not all the time, but there was nothing kinetic going on. And it was in the evening, and the Taliban kind of calmed down. It was like, okay, well, let's break the ice, and let's kind of relax for a bit. Hey, Joel, why don't you... Let's see Arnold Schwarzenegger in like, a drama, or Romeo and Juliet. And then I get up there and be like, light breaks through on the window, we at Juliet, come out. We have to go now. So stuff like that. Or it was George Bush in Tombstone as Doc Holliday. Like they got real specific. Like, let's see George Bush as Doc Holliday with the last gunfight with Johnny Ringo. I'm like, I know that scene. They're like, yeah, we know you do. Like, let's see... Why, Johnny Ringo? looks like somebody just trampled all over your grave. I guess I beg to differ. And like,
I'm almost picturing like like little cups with like, okay, here's the character voice.
Yeah.
Here's the movie that you're gonna, all right, go.
Yeah. Let's see Christopher Walken as Doc Brown in Back to the Future. Marty, it's great to see you. You're here. This is a DeLorean. It goes back in time. Runs on plutonium, 1.21 gigawatts, so there was always these different character things, and some of it was presidents, some of it was actors, and some of it was just big personalities, and that was like I wouldn't call it a pastime, but that was a way for us to kind of cut up a little bit, maybe for 5 or 10 minutes, get a good laugh, and then we go back to preparing for tomorrow, because it's pretty intense when you're dealing with close air support, you're dealing with medevacs, you've got people dying on helicopters when they're coming back to you, and you're like, well, I was an 18-year-old, I was a 21-year-old who was like a triple amputee, or like, you read the medical readouts, it's like, yeah, it's not good. Like, God help them. So that weighs on you. And,
well, but you hit a good point. Even just that 20 or 30 minutes of levity probably helped a lot of people.
After I left, I got emails from people saying, when are you coming back? Like, it's no more fun without you. And I'm like, oh, I'm good. I did 7 months, and I believe I did my very best. So, I look forward to seeing when you come home, but there was like the Brits were like, we're going to miss him. Like they were telling other Marines who were taking over, like, we're going to miss Searls. Like he understands British theater and like classical stage. And like we would have discussions about some of that, like, well, what do you think of Richard III? Or like, who was your favorite Bond, and like, why? And I'm like, actually, Connery, but I like Timothy Dalton. And like, yeah, Dalton was a theater actor. And like, so there was I guess a respect for some of their culture,
right?
And I'd have tea with them. And one time I got invited to have tea and gummy bears. Hey, Joel, I just got a care package from my mom. I've got tea and gummies. I'm like, gummies? Okay, I have some gummy bears? Okay. And you go back and like, eat, like, I guess I was so tired and hungry, I didn't even care. Like just drinking tea and like eating like, different gummy bears. I'm like, it was actually kind of good. Like whatever, and then back up to my front. And, they were like exchanging books we were exchanging books and like different ideas. And the one Wing Commander Dale, he sounded like Sean Connery. He was Scottish. And he would try to do like impressions with me. And he was like, okay, what do you think of this one, Joel? He's like, get your damn hands off me, you bloody ape. And I'm like, sounds like Sean Connery in Planet of the Apes. He's like, well, I'm Scottish, Joel. What do you expect? I can't do Charlton Heston, And so there was like there was a sense of humor there. And we had Lieutenant Colonel Atherton. He's probably a colonel or general now. He was a British Royal Marine Commando, and he was hilarious. Like he was very dry, very witty, he could be cutting. He was very intense, and he was also like very professional. And there was an instance where this person was being very rude to one of the other officers, and we were asking for air support, which is a legitimate request. And, this person that my boss was talking to, like, was like cussing at him and like yelling at him. And, Chris is a pretty stout guy who can take care of himself. And he was like, dude, like, you might want to calm down. And it's like Colonel Atherton chimed in. I was like kind of smiling because I knew what was going to happen. And he was like, what, Chris, would you like me to speak with him? And we're all like, yeah, this is going to get ugly. And so he got on there with him, and he identified himself, and he's like, yeah, you're a young man. He's like, what is wrong? And the guy was like yelling at a colonel, which is stupid, It's like, even though the guy's not in the same room, he knows your boss and other bosses. So it's like, you're openly disrespectful, and it's like no bullets are flying here. So it's like, I don't know what your issues are, buddy, but it's not ideal.
Right.
We all have those moments, but this was not a good one. And he like the colonel kept trying to talk him down on this call, like, no, young man, you just need to relax. And then finally, like, his head kind of like turned, and he kind of snapped. He's like, you just best remember who you're talking to here, sunshine. And the way he said sunshine was like, I'm going to eat your soul. Like, that's the way it came out. And he like hung up on him, and we were all like, damn, like that guy needed that. But I was like, wow, that's legit. And he went over and sat down, and he's like cracking his knuckles, and then his phone rings. And this British colonel calls up, or general, and he's like, oh, no, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. No, no, it's okay. There's no need to be sorry. Like, they apologize to each other. This very British gentleman, like, no, I should have taken a moment. And like, then he got up and apologized to us. And he's like, we don't need to do that and threaten, and make comments like that. He's like, we are the command center here. We need to be professional and not let people push our buttons, because we have to make logical decisions that are life and death. And so he's like, just from now on, let's I won't do that anymore. Let's not yell at other people. That's their problem. we don't need to make it our problem. I'm like, okay. And we, again, we were all like, that was pretty cool. That guy, whenever he called back, was like super professional. And I'm like, wow, like, I guess he got put in his place, So, and we would do impressions with Colonel Atherton, and he had like a top 10 list, like Letterman, the last time he was there in country, the last day he operated with us, he had like a top 10 list and went through it. I made the list. And he made a joke about me in my film history. He's like, if we all went to hear Lieutenant Searls' film history, he's like, well, ask for him, which they did most of the time. He was just poking fun at me. I took it as a good thing. I'm like, well, if I'm making his list, it must be something. It must be good. I also got a JHFA patch from him, a Joint Helicopter Force Afghanistan patch. He was like, give this to Joel. I'm like, oh, cool. So I must be in the club somehow if I'm getting, Apache helicopter patches from the colonel.
Right.
But he was, just stern, as you'd expect from a British lieutenant colonel. But so those were like, obviously some of the better experiences there in country that I came home with. And then there obviously were others that were, very sad, very tragic.
Right.
You're watching flag draped caskets get put on C-130s at night, and you're like, oh, that's an 18-year-old, and that's a 19-year-old. I'm, in my 20s. I'm like, okay, it's younger. It could be my brother. It could be a cousin. So those were very, it's war.
Right.
So, nonetheless, what was your question before that? I know I went off on
we got diverted, but so I'll bring you back to what year did you graduate from the UCLA master's program?
I left there in 2017, graduated. I graduated June of 2017, and I started at a agency. I ran into the Adam gentleman again, and I was like, dude, I went on and done all these things.
When you say you started an agency, what kind of agency?
A talent agency.
Okay.
I was in the mailroom wearing a suit and tie and polished shoes and delivering mail and boxes of wine and scripts and other, different gifts and stuff to people.
But taking that quote unquote low level job because of the benefits long term, you were already looking at it that way?
Yeah, I figured, going in, there's street cred from that. You've worked at an agency, and you can speak to legitimacy of you've been inside the sausage factory, you've been inside the heart and the trenches of a business, of the business. It's like I was on a lot of calls and got to be around meetings and to hear those discussions, and it does give you a legitimacy. Even if you're just a fly on the wall, you hear that stuff, you're like, okay, I kind of can see where this is going to go. You develop the intuition for it and the gut sense of okay, this will work. That's not going to work. And so, yeah, it was, me in there, captain in the reserves, Afghanistan vet, and then an MBA working his way up. And it's really the only way I knew how, at least from what I was told and advised, you've got to start in some place like that to understand the business. And it was boot camp.
When you're starting out at a position like that and you're coming in the door, like you said, master's graduate from UCLA, Marine Corps officer, are they not looking at you kind of like, what are you doing this for? Or do they understand the big picture and the long term of what you're trying to get to?
Some of them, I think, did. Some of them who didn't have any touch to the military or didn't have any, maybe some of them didn't have graduate level education, so it didn't make sense to them. But most of the attorneys, most of the people, even other people who had graduate degrees were like, yeah, I get why you're doing this. It makes sense. That's the only way you learn this part of the business. You don't, unless you're, your dad is so-and-so, your mom's so-and-so, you can go in and get a higher level position. But it's yeah, my dad drives trains for a living. Yeah, he's going to call the agency and get me. He's going to sweet talk me and get me right in. It didn't work that way. And so yeah, there was some deference, actually a fair amount by certain people that was granted to me because of my military service, and it kind of hey, fix this, or mentorship time, which agencies aren't really known for because they're so fast paced, they're so cutthroat and competitive, and they're also, it's you got to keep moving. It's a very fluid environment. And you got to keep your head on a swivel, which I learned, and it was definitely a change of mindset and understanding the world and what works, at least in that business. And, the person I worked for, served in the Marines, and he was a managing partner at the company. He looked like my older brother. It was kind of interesting when I went to interview with him. I'm like, it looks like someone I'd be related to. And his favorite movies were Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I'm like, he's about the same age as my brother. So I'm like, yeah, I probably can work for this guy. And he was from Florida. And the task for me was read this script and cast it with my clients. And I was like, and I knew some of his clients and stuff. Most of them very legit, if not all of them.
Pardon a silly question. Being tasked with casting a rule. Is this now a step up from the mailroom, or is this?
Oh yeah, being an assistant for a managing partner is I mean, like that's a big.
How long did that process take?
It was like, I think it was in the mailroom 2 or 3 weeks, and they were like, okay, we need to get you on a desk because you seem to be very competent. You know the industry, you know the history of it. Like you probably can work and understand this business, and you're a veteran, so we'll figure something out. And so I went and interviewed for a few different desks, and it's like, they wanted to go with somebody else, which is fine. That's their choice. And his desk opened up, and I went and interviewed with him, and it was like, yeah, this seems like the right feel for the situation. And he was very, very respectful of like my service in Afghanistan and like, me being a Marine. And he the casting of it, I read through the script, and I cast his clients that fit the script. And I sent them the email. I think I read it like that night. That next morning, it was like right in his inbox at like 7:30 or 8. And he read through it. I can't remember if he called me in or maybe sent me the email back. He called me in and we talked. And he said, "You cast my clients the same way I did, same roles." And he's like, "So yeah, we can work together. It could be great."
It was just merely almost like a test for you to see where your thought process was, where you were going to work through, and if it was going to be at least in the same ballpark as him.
Yeah, and if I was creative enough to understand and be able to see people and have that intuition, which I passed that test. And it was like I worked for him and, packaged a feature film with him. It was Running with the Devil with Jason Cabell. I was very lucky and blessed to have the opportunity to be a part of that. And, I remember I broke a rule when I figured, I was like, you only get one chance in life. And so I worked for him for a couple of weeks, and I knew he'd worked in packaging at one point where he'd packaged inside agencies and helped package features and get them financed. And you're not supposed to get producing credits at an agency if you're an agent, because you're sanctioned by or licensed by the state just to be a fiduciary duty and get your 10%. You're not supposed to get producing fees and other stuff. Like you can package, but it's like once it goes out the door, it becomes that on-set producer's project and, financiers and stuff. So he'd packaged a lot of things and started like the packaging department like in the 2000s. So it was like this guy could do a lot of different things. Very smart, very disciplined himself. And I was like, I've got.
Was that the primary? I'll call it the primary business model of this company, was packaging movies?
No, their primary was they were initially like a talent agency. They repped actors. I mean, you had Fishburne, you had Andy Garcia was there at one point. You had, I think Katherine Heigl was there. Like they had a lot of like very, very legit talent. And I think, they have Janet Jackson and Mike Tyson and a bunch of other people. They used to rep Jada Pinkett Smith. Like Stephen King used to be a client there. Like it's just a broad range of like legit, usually A-list people, if not, just a little bit, maybe A-. But it was like they were like Oscar-winning actors and stuff. It was a very, very A-list environment. And they had a motion picture department, and then they had a TV literature department. TV literature at that point did do packaging. You could package television shows. That got taken away a few years ago, I think, by the WGA, and there was a strike before the pandemic, or there was an issue before the pandemic. And he had primarily been a talent agent. He worked with some people for like decades. And I was like, hey, I've got a script as it gets written by, retired SEAL. No, I'm not supposed to say this, but you should probably read it. He was like, well, tell me about it. I was like, well, it's got financing, and it's like I believe Nick Cage was attached at that point. If not, that was like in process. And like this guy's legit. Like he's very much a legit SEAL, which I don't know if too many not legit ones, but it was like he was, 2 Bronze Stars with a V and like some Purple Heart and a lot of legitimate commendations and awards. And so Andrew's like, okay, I print it out. I'll read it. Just because you're a Marine, you're going to be picking up, major. He's like, I'll read it for you. I'm like, okay. He read it and came in like the next day or the following day and was like, or like the second day, he was like, you said a SEAL wrote this? He's like, bring this guy in here, because this is like a really great like drug thriller script. He's like, you don't see scripts like this anymore. I was like, okay. Brought Jason and him in, and they hit it off, and had a great time, and we were able to put Fishburne in it, and Clifton Collins and Peter Facinelli. And there was others who wanted, but they were already booked. Clients of Andrews that were like, hey, a SEAL's directing a movie? Like, you got Andrew's a Marine and Joel's a Marine. Okay, this sounds like something cool, like a guy's movie, like an action movie. Well, I'm interested. And it was filmed there, I believe, that 2018, edited and stuff, and put together real well. And Fishburne had a great time on the project, to my knowledge, and really loved Jason, and that was kind of some further catalyst to Jason coming on there as a client. To my knowledge, he's still there. Me and Jason talk once or twice a month and just catch up. He's on his pathway as a director,
right?
And I'm happy to have been able to help him in some way, or another, and have tried to as well, and other things.
Once that movie went into actual production and filming, did you have any hand in it?
I was able to go to set once. I got to be in a scene. Jason's like, "Yeah, let's get you in here." And so I was like a drug warehouse thug who I practiced for months on my mugshot, mugged face. It was my Oscar-winning performance, and I was leaning up against a like a warehouse box or something with a prop shotgun, looking like a thug, a Boy Scout looking thug. And then I was there
with a high and tight.
Yeah, exactly. You had a flat top. Like, what is he, Biff from Back to the Future? Hey, McFly. No, nothing like that. My hair was a little bit longer then. And then I was there, I think, another time on set when they were doing the parachute stunt scenes and stuff, and got to be a part of that. That was really cool. And, it was definitely a learning experience, but my role was there at the agency, still kind of and I helped facilitate other aspects for the production. I think they were looking for an editor or something, and we worked on that. Me and Andrew tried to find some people, or at least connect them to folks who could help them. Just different things, kind of support type of stuff. And then I was part of the edit. My voice is in there. I played the preacher at the funeral. There's a funeral in the film, and I'm like, Jason's like, "Yeah, you can recite the Bible, can't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been around enough." And I started just quoting some stuff from the Bible, and Jason's like, "Yep, that'll work." And so I even got my face is in there. I'm looking mean, and then you hear my voice as a preacher, saying a few things and probably 5 or 10 seconds worth of dialogue. So it was neat. That was what I'd written in my essay back in 2013, had come to pass by 2018, within 5 years. And, I spent about another year or so at the agency and realized it was I've got to do something more creative. The agents have a career, that is a profession, and some of those people are just, they're able to defy gravity and sell stuff and get things made and get clients gigs and stuff. They're defying gravity. They're doing something that's very hard. And I respect that, but it's I don't think this is me, and I have friends that still work in the agency business, guys I catch up with. Usually they're into military movies, and they're into classic Scorsese and Raging Bull and Godfather and stuff. So it's they understand the film history and like it too. So there's some connection points there. But I just recognize, that really was not my right fit. And understanding business is important, but being on that specific aspect of the business, it just wasn't fulfilling. I don't know how else to put it. And it just didn't click with who I am. And so, I peeled out. I did a very abbreviated master's program, thinking maybe I'll go more entertainment finance. And I went through a program at SC that was a very focused finance program. And I was working at an entertainment finance company, a boutique investment banking firm during interning there and getting ready to work there full time in 2020.
And this is merely a company that a director or producer or whoever comes to them and says, "Here's the project we want to do. Can you get us the money to do it?" Is that
not exactly? They were more they worked with MGM fixing their finances and debt, because MGM had high interest rates, and they wanted to scale down their payments or try to reduce, and a lot of companies do that, and they go in and have people work on the refinancing and kind of the runway that people are on, finance being the runway, and they restructured a lot of debt for entertainment companies.
So legitimate finance work, almost like an internal audit company.
Some of that, some of the, there's an investment banking aspect of finding potential acquisitions for, studios and different companies, and for maybe investors. Okay, here's the next Spotify, here's the next Audible, here's the next YouTube, or, whatever they can fire. And okay, well, we'll acquire it, or we're going to pass on this one. And so that's, to my understanding, more of the investment banking aspect that they were in. So they did a couple of financial consulting, it seemed, and some audit style work, and like a restructuring, financial restructuring. And then they did finding opportunities for big studios to acquire smaller up and coming creative aspects or creative applications and stuff. So that it was interesting. His plan was to get started in the summer of 2020, and obviously that world changed immensely.
Just a little.
Yeah, it was wild. And so I had a call July 1st from my boss at the company. He's like, "Hey, I hope you're well." He's like, "But I had to close up my business. I've been acquired, and I'm not able to take you with me. Sorry." And I was like, "New guy there. I was coming out of an internship, so it wasn't like I'd been there for 5 or 10 years and, was like a vice president or something. It just didn't exist." And he was like, "I'll keep you in mind and wish you the best." But he's like, I wish I had more for you, which was better news.
And you'd already finished the master's program at SC.
I did, yes. I finished that and was kind of like in this holding pattern. And at that same point, I was with the Marine Corps Entertainment Office. I'd been a reservist since 2014 and had, worked at a couple different units, and I'd pursued all branches have a entertainment liaison office, to my knowledge, like all of them do. And most of them have it on both coasts. In New York City, which is more news, and like there's a media sense there and a lot of, large companies. And then here in LA, it's obviously film, television, reality TV, stuff like that, music. And
is that simply to be an advisor to the industry?
Liaison. You kind of connect the industry to like the Marine Corps. Oh, we want to shoot on Camp Pendleton. We're going to show the Marines in a great light. Okay, well, we can hook you up with these units and this equipment and these helicopters. And, again, it has to meet the sniff test.
Right. And
it has to have distribution, a bunch of other stuff. And so, I was lucky enough to get into the office and okay, you've done this stuff before. You have some experience in the industry. Okay, you be our business dev guy and reach out and set up meetings and find stuff. And I did. And I sent emails and called people. Did stuff for reserve duty as best I could, while still working at Paradigm. And at this point it was the officer in charge. I gave him a ring and was like, "Hey, I just lost my civilian job." And leading up to that, in the spring of 2020, I'd done some interviews with military veterans, Marines in particular, one for the office and then one for an SC, Annenberg. And they were like, they were good, and I got some good feedback from it. And my boss was like, "Okay, well, I want to help you, but what do you want to do? We're closed. There's no screenings. There's no filming. We're just like Hollywood." He's like, "We're not going into the office much at all. We're not allowed to." Okay. So what would you want to do? What about I interview successful Marines in Hollywood? And he was like, "That's a great idea. And I help with recruiting." And he's like, "You're a good storyteller. Go get me a list, bring it back. I'll approve the list and you can go find these people. You're good at finding people and getting through the mazes of Hollywood to at least knock on a door to say, 'Hey, this is who we are,' or 'This is who I am. Do you have 5 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever?'" And so that opened the door for I think it was 17 interviews. And some of the top ones, Don P. Belisario, who created Magnum PI and NCIS and JAG and Quantum Leap and Airwolf, and it's a slew of stuff, great stuff.
Was this all intended to be written? Like you were going to produce a written article of the interview? Okay.
Yes. And they provided pictures most of the time of their time in service and growing up, and it's kind of like a little mini biographies,
right.
And weaved with some cool stories and time on set and getting to work in these different mystery shows or dramas or science fiction, private detective work in Hawaii in the 80s.
That premise for a TV show probably wouldn't work.
I don't think so. No. People don't like Hawaii.
No.
People don't like Ferraris.
Nope.
People with British accents, names Higgins. I mean, they're just, guard dogs and stuff.
The worst thing to do would be stick the main character in Hawaii and make him be like a Detroit Tigers fan.
Who likes the Tigers? Tigers are awful.
Nobody's going to put that together.
No. I think you're right. I think we need to do something else, I'll take that back to Mr. Belisario, too. We need to change.
Give me credit for it, though.
I will. We'll get you a consulting producer or something, or special thanks,
Who was the biggest surprise to you to find out that they'd actually served and were in the entertainment industry?
That's a great question. Of all the interviews I've done, because thinking about it, some of them in particular, like you can see it in their writing when they tell you. And you're like, Bob Gunton. Now, he wasn't a Marine. He was in the Army. Do you know who that is? You ever seen Shawshank Redemption?
Okay.
He up and vanished like a fart in the wind. That guy, the warden. He was a Vietnam vet, a decorated Army veteran, and he helped save some soldiers' lives and load like medevacs and stuff when a hill they were on was under attack. And I mean, he's very humble about it and very mature. But I was surprised to find him to be a Vietnam vet, and I was even more surprised to find out he was also a singer on Broadway. And he was in the initial Broadway production of Evita as Evita's husband. I'm drawing a blank on the character's name, but he was like, I mean, he sang in, I believe he sang in choir. He grew up Catholic, and he had sung through church, and then he was drafted in the late 60s, and he was studying acting at Irvine, UC Irvine, and he got drafted and went to the Army. And he was like, I was like a late 20s guy who went to college and was educated. And he's like, they made me like, a corporal or specialist or a sergeant. And he's like, I stuck out like a sore thumb because everybody else was like 18, looked real young, and I had a mature face and was tall. And he was like, it was a challenge. He was like, I was trying to fit in with like younger guys. And it's kind of like, this sergeant guy, he's mature. And, it was a great interview. We were connected on Facebook and messaged back and forth, and he'll wish me like a happy Veterans Day or something. I do the same thing. I appreciate him. And Shawshank Redemption is one of my favorite movies that was filmed in Ohio. I've been to the men's reformatory there in Ohio where they filmed that, and so it's kind of neat. Like, that's pretty cool. Like Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman and a lot of my favorite actors. I'm like, this is neat. So, but he would probably stick out as the most. I just didn't expect it. I did some research and I reached out for We Are the Mighty and was like, hey, Jake did an interview for us? Sure, Joe. And the guy's very funny. Like on our Zoom call, like some of the stuff and the quips he made were hilarious. I'm like this guy, like he can play a threatening warden. He can serve in the Army in Vietnam, and he also can crack jokes, and he's really, really sharp. And then he can sing as well. I'm like, this guy's interesting. And probably the most interesting aspect of his story was, and I'm making sure I'm recalling this correctly, he, as a lot of veterans, you get out of service, and especially if you've been in a war, one you didn't win, you can get disgruntled, or you can get, kind of hard on yourself. And you're like, man, I wish I didn't have to serve, or wish I was home here and I could have had more acting opportunities and could have gotten to be an actor younger, which always helps in any profession to go in as young as you can. And he was given an opportunity to do some off-Broadway or off-Broadway play as like a Vietnam vet, I believe. And that opened the door for like representation and like opportunities on, off Broadway and on like it just, he's like, yeah, so me playing a Vietnam vet in this, unpaid role, once or twice or three times a week for like a month or two. He's like, that got me like reviewed at like different papers and stuff. And he's like, I just didn't expect, my Vietnam experience actually helped pave the way for better success as an actor. Whereas for a while, I believe he was like, again, looking inward, like, it just wasn't, why'd I have to do that? Or, why didn't somebody else have to go? Or like it's been very tough transitioning home. So again, pretty sure I'm recalling that very well. I mean, I did write it, but it's been almost 3 years. But yeah, that kind of stuck out as a important point from him. And it makes sense for me too. Like I've come home and obviously worked on the business side of entertainment, and I've seen different things, and I've been on the finance side, and it's kind of like, in the pandemic, when I lose my job, the thing that pays my bills is me writing and telling people stories and, getting to collaborate and talk with other people who are creatives in the industry. And I'm like, I think this is more of my cup of tea. And, I've been very blessed with my success, getting to do some acting. And I went out and started doing that about a year ago. It'd been since 2007, last time I'd really done any, outside of like a workshop or something, or like maybe like a class or some classes. And I found it very therapeutic, very, very fulfilling and relaxing, in a sense where I'm like, okay, this is something I need to do more of. And, and getting paid for it, you're like, getting paid for acting in California or New York City or anywhere. It's like, that's really hard. And so, I've been paid for it. I'm like, okay, I can pay my bills at this. And I realize I'm not Tom Selleck in Magnum PI or, Mark Harmon in NCIS or, Adam Driver. I mean, that guy's got a great career. and post his service. And he's like a Juilliard trained actor. So he's like, very well educated. And, those guys are on a different level. I'm just kind of happy doing my own shuffle. I'm like, wow, I'm doing my own thing. And, I get to do these journalism articles and have had doors open to speak with people, veterans and non-veterans, to speak with people about their stories and get to cover like big feature films coming out and almost, take part in like kind of the messaging and the strategic branding of a film, and it's usually they're military ones or action ones that I would enjoy and likely other veterans and their family members would, they're a brand to them. And I was hired to write a screenplay, which I kind of showed up on my doorstep, which is nice. And I did a veteran writing workshop through the WGF Writers Guild Foundation a couple years back through a recommendation of a friend. While I was writing a lot of these journalism articles, I started taking these evening mentorship classes through the guild, and they pair you with like legit TV producers and legit showrunners and screenwriters and stuff. Like it's a pretty intense program, and it's very legit. And I learned a lot through it. It was like it helped my journalism writing and helped my storytelling. And I was like, hey, if they're going to spend 12 months with us, and many times over these 12 months, and we had a writing master's class with Billy Ray. You know who that is? Great screenwriter. Trying to remember all his credits. Pretty sure it's Hunger Games, Captain Phillips, Richard Jewell, which is a Clint Eastwood film. Great screenwriter. I mean, probably one of the best alive. He came in and gave us a master's class where I'm like, that's like the best writing class I've ever got. Like it was just very like on point. And you're like, okay, this guy is legit, which we know, but it's like, this is why he's legit. Very disciplined, very regimented.
This class through the Writers Guild, though, was not specific for veterans.
It's the Writers Guild Foundation Veteran Writing Workshop. And if there's anybody listening to this and they want to get into writing or say they're already into it, you should check it out. It's I believe it opens after the first of the year, and I think the applications are due by late February or early March, and then by like June or July is when the program starts. And it's online mostly now, post the pandemic. They may have done some more in-person things, as the pandemic has subsided. Nonetheless, it is the Veteran Writing Workshop, and it is like there's two tracks. One is a screenwriter doing a feature, and then one is a TV pilot. And I chose the pilot pathway. And learned a lot and read a lot and rewrote a lot, and writing is rewriting.
What's the cost? Something like, because you're a veteran?
Mm-hmm. $0.
So take advantage of it being a veteran. Yeah,
it's your time. I mean, you've got to show them that you can write, and you've got to do some pilots and things yourself. And you have to come up with some ideas of what you want to pitch, and then you take one of your pitches and put it together, and you do the research and build it.
Is there almost, I will equate it to like an entrance testing process to get accepted into the program? Yeah,
I'm sure there's a board that reviews all the different applications, and there are people who get in and those who don't. And I'm not privy to why that you get in or don't. It's probably just a sense of like how well you're writing, how professional you are, how maybe disciplined you appear. And, me with all these interviews, and, I'd written a pilot, and I was a playwright in college. They were like, it seemed like that. I was like, yeah, we'll let you in. And like, we know you'll write something. We know you'll actually put the work in because you've done it yourself many times before. And some of that stuff's not paid, and it's still good writing. So you have the desire. I think that's probably what they look for. And
I'll use the overarching term Hollywood. Is Hollywood embracing of veterans, and are there a lot of groups or units that a veteran could step into for assistance getting through this process and getting deeper into the entertainment industry?
Yes, there are avenues. You have to remember, though, the industry is hard for anybody trying to get in. Whether a person of color, diverse, you're even if you're a produced playwright, if you come from a family of writers and stuff, it's still you're jumping hurdles, you're jumping through hoops, you're grinding. It's not easy, and great writing never is, and great acting's never easy. It's like Denzel worked for like probably 8 or 10 years before he did like television, like St. Elsewhere. Like he was acting for a long time before that on stage and off Broadway and stuff. And let's say if he started acting in probably the mid 70s, it was almost 30 years until he earned an Oscar for Training Day. So, when people say, oh, I just want to go out and be an actor, I'll just get discovered. It is a lot of hard work. And, unless you've actually been around that or seen that or like know someone in the industry, there's a similar kind of thing with like veteran stuff, or people don't understand it. They're out of touch, or they just never have had that opportunity to like, okay, this is what is behind the curtain. This is what the sausage factory does. And so there are programs that do help with that. There are opportunities and other internships, and you can take the projects you wrote from the Writers Guild, and if they're good enough or you think they're good enough, you can take them and send them to managers and agents and do cover letters and inquiry letters and try to get yourself representation. That stuff happens, and for a lot of people. And I know of people who've finished the program and went on and started doing their own comic books and selling them and getting them some on publication shelves and on websites. And I know of people who've went and done like video game writing and stuff. And it does open doors. You get out of it what you put into it. And with anything in life, it's your time. And I was very focused and wanted to make sure I got as much as I could out of it. And keeping in touch with your mentors helps too. If they know you're still working on the industry and you're still pressing forward, it's like, okay, maybe they hear of something sometime in a year or two, and they're like, yeah, I know Jimmy or Sarah or Joel. Like, you should talk with them. Maybe they can help you with your script, or maybe they have some ideas for you. Like, you always try to keep the doorways open and those bridges open and be a professional. So, they are there, but even with that, like, it's still a very, very tough industry. And, there's so many people that want to be in it. There's, I use some of the stuff you probably already know. From
your experience, because you're now roughly about a decade connected to it, what are some of the big mistakes that you see veterans have made trying to get that foot in?
Not understanding the culture, and it takes a while, because it took me a few years to kind of transition off active duty and kind of understand what I was operating in. So I made mistakes along the way. I'm guilty of that. And there's certainly things that you do different, but I didn't have the knowledge in. You only can do with what you know, and if you don't know it, and you're trying to know it, okay, you're doing the best you can. If you're actively trying to go and make enemies with people, then maybe you should try another industry, or maybe you should get some personal help. You want to work with people you want to work with and are flexible and professional and creative and, team oriented. But it's probably just not knowing the industry or coming in and thinking, well, I was this or that, or I had this MOS, like, this should be worth something. And a lot of times you find out it is worth something, but it's not worth what you thought, because there's so many other people out there already doing it, or they're already in line. There's a quote from LA Confidential, and I can't remember if it's in the book, but I know it's in the film. And it's Russell Crowe, Guy Pearce, and it's about early 50s LA. And it's one of my favorite films. And James Ellroy was fantastic. Curtis Hanson, who directed it, it's like they captured the old golden era Hollywood with the acting, but also had told the story of what was behind that curtain in the 50s, and did very well at it. And it's Guy Pearce and Russell Crowe. And they're dealing with this DA who's trying to be a tough guy, and they're trying to bully him to get info and manipulate him. And then the DA's like says something like 10,000 people get off a bus every day, and 10,000 people get on a bus every day wanting to be actors or wanting to be in the Hollywood business. And I was like, that's pretty, it's not 10,000, it's probably more or less, but it's like at different points. It's a lot of people getting on. It's a lot of transientness, a lot of you have to realize you got here, and it's like, you may have the next Star Wars, you may have the next Lord of the Rings. It's going to take a while for you to find the right people, and a lot of knocking on doors and a lot of shoe leather. Again, unless you're connected or you are like a billionaire yourself, and you're just going to go fund your own movie, and you have some clue of what you're doing. You're going to have to do a lot of shoe leather, a lot of walking, a lot of meetings, a lot of talking with people, and you have to get a gut sense of what's going on. And, coming in with even I'd say a military mindset, mission oriented, it's good, but it's like there has to be a flexibility there. There has to be a velvet touch. There has to be something there that's maybe curated or more refined. It's just, you can have a refined military touch, and it's just not the same. It's a different industry. And it's what you can add to a project. And okay, maybe you can add some military consulting. Maybe you are great at writing dialogue for people on radios or in a firefight. Okay, we'll bring you in, or we'll like to hear your thoughts, and wherever that leads. If you get paid for it, great. It's tough to get paid in the business. Those are, if I answered the questions directly as I could, but it's like, coming in with a humble attitude, even though it's an industry that, has a lot of big personalities, you still want to be below the radar and be able to work with. You have to realize your place at the table.
Almost seems like you have to earn your right to have an ego.
Yeah, I'd say you do. I mean, it was a Sly Stallone was sleeping on a park bench or something, and like Billy Bob Thornton was like living out of a hotel. I mean, these are just things I've heard. It seems like they're true. And I mean, there's a lot of people who couch surfed for years. A lot of people who, worked their tail off to get into the business. And like, I mean, acting, like if you're doing that, it's like you need to do that every day. You need to practice every day, just like you're doing martial arts, just like you're training for the Olympics. And if you're writing, you want to write every day, if not every other day, but certainly every day. And it's like you have to make that a habit, even an hour a day, even 45 minutes. Like you're always trying to do something a day to like put to where you're better than yesterday. And it's not just showing up and looking great on camera and delivering some wonderful line like Leslie Nielsen or something, and surely you can't be serious, there's a lot of training and time that went behind those lines in Airplane and Naked Gun movies. So it's knowing your place, it's knowing your audience, most importantly, and also understanding the culture and how maybe they view the military. Like it's tough getting out and going into really any field, I think, but it's like Hollywood is probably one of the more challenging ones, just because there's so many nuanced creative personalities with so many different ways of looking at things, and it's very creative at its core. And humans have that capacity across the board to have creativity in some aspect or another. Music, construction, real estate, selling cars. You can creatively pitch and sell cars to people. Like you use it in different ways. Hollywood is very much characters and fantasy and actions. You just have those different genres, but it's all very creative at its core and in a very specific way. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and you hit on something of, if you want to be a writer, for instance, or even as an actor, you mentioned, you got to be practicing it every day. So this leads me into my follow-up question of, all right, so you've got somebody who's current active duty. They see their transition out coming in a year from now. Other than if they want to get into writing, start maybe taking an hour a day writing. What other advice would you say for somebody who's active duty to start maybe just those initial, because obviously if they're deployed or they're stationed away from Hollywood, there's limited access, but what could they also do? I
mean, you could take Zoom acting classes, and you find veteran-friendly ones. They're acting classes. I mean, I found one through VME. And my acting coach, his father was a Vietnam vet, so he's very much, in tune with the veterans, and a good acting coach and a good actor himself, a great actor, and you should find those. I mean, do Zoom sessions with an acting coach, do Zoom sessions even with some of the people from your acting class, and the online acting classes are not usually as expensive as the in-person ones. I mean, it's not the exact same experience, but you're still getting to act. You're still doing something with another human that you can connect with as best you can through all the technology. I mean, the ideal for me is still right in front of you, whether it's theater, whether it's film, television, etc. But that's one way, doing online acting classes. You can educate your mind on the different, method and classical, and you can read Stanislavski's books, you can read Anton Chekhov's books, you can read Sandy Meisner's book. Meisner taught like Robert Duvall, and he taught Tom Cruise. He was Neighborhood Playhouse in New York City. He taught for 50, 60 years, passed away in the 90s. He even got a Presidential Medal of Freedom for all of his work in the arts and people he influenced positively to become, great actors and actresses. I even think Marilyn Monroe was one of his students. I could be wrong. And so there's a way you can self-educate. Just like if you're getting ready for deployment, you want to read all you can about the country you're going to. You want to read about the experience, the after-action reports of other units that have been there. Go and start reading. Go and start watching documentaries, on Spielberg, and documentaries on Scorsese, and just pay attention to how they deal with actors. And you can even watch documentaries on actors. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger had one that came out. I don't know if it was Fubar was the series, but I can't remember if it was I think the documentary's different. But there's that stuff out there. Watch those things and understand them. And I mean, there's even A&E used to do biographies a lot, and I don't know if that show's still on. It was lampooned a lot on Saturday Night Live, which was fun. But on the History Channel, they have like biographies of like Paul Newman and biographies of like Steve McQueen, and you know, I'm sure they even have them like Brad Pitt and some of the more current actors. You know, if that show went off the air 5 or 10 years ago, you can go find those on YouTube or on A&E or like streaming, and you can find biographies and understand who these people were and kind of get the history of it and see their craft, and you can learn from that. It's not the same as doing it yourself and being on stage and doing that 3 hours a night, 5 times a week or 4 times a week, or being on a film set and doing take after take after take after scene and rehearsal. Like that's, I mean, Olympic level. You're there operating at that 8 hours a day or 4 hours a day or however long you operate on set, and you're not in your trailer or, you know, hanging out and holding with other actors. So it's self-generated time. And if you look at the creatives in the industry, they are all pretty much self-generating. George Lucas, James Cameron, I think Jennifer Lopez, like she does a lot of stuff with her own company. Reese Witherspoon, Sandra Rhimes. There's so many of them that are self-generating. So it's like you have to kind of be self-generating yourself and like self-studying yourself. Like I could probably take 6 months off of work and I'd get through all the books I want to read and like all the movies I want to watch and like all the self and like acting stuff I want to do. And you're always developing as a creative. Learning something from one of the acting classes I took, and I agree with it. You're always trying to build your mind, and that's, you know, at UCLA they're big on John Wooden, the famous basketball coach, and I'm big on him too. I love the guy's thoughts, and you know, he was well respected by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and so many other, Bill Walton and so many other great players that were. He was a strict coach, but he was very a spiritual man too. But he was very much a lifelong learner type of thing. And that's a mindset. And that's kind of like the more you expose your mind to learning and gathering new information, you aren't going to retain it all. You're not a walking hard drive, or at least you shouldn't be, you know, unless it's the Matrix or something. I know Kung Fu. You know, that's there's Keanu Reeves for you. Keanu Reeves in Braveheart. It's my island, man. Tubulosar. Let's get in the phone booth, man. Let's get out of here. Anyways,
I'm thinking of like a live episode where people just start throwing out actors and throwing out movies and just have you sit here and try to see if you could pull them off.
Well, hey, you want to do that sometime? I'm game for it, you know.
Have you gotten into or gone down the path of actually just doing voice acting?
I have explored it, and it's on my to-do list. I've been busy doing Marine stuff, and then, you know, trying to think of all the other stuff that I've been doing, and basically getting prepared for different aspects of the career, finishing the screenplay I was writing on, pitching, you know, things to survive on, pitching, you know, entertainment news articles to write. And so, you know, once I get those out of the way, and I've got like the websites, I have like 40 tabs open on my computer. It's like I have the tabs right there where I can just go through them and start taking voice acting classes and get a reel done. And so, yeah, I have considered that. People have told me that many times, like, you're really good at like doing that. It's like it was childhood watching cartoons and you know, Robin Williams, you know, obviously a favorite of mine. Jonathan Winters is a favorite of mine as well. Do you know who that was? Mm-hmm. Now, he was a Marine and he survived the Pacific campaign. Okay. So he was, I'm sure he used some of his comedy to probably deal with what he'd seen over there. But one of my friends and mentors is Peter Cullen, and that's the voice of Optimus Prime. And that was an interview I got to do, and Peter's been very kind to me and very, very fun to talk with, and he was friends with Jonathan Winters. He was friends with like Burt Reynolds and all these people. Peter based Optimus Prime off of his brother, who was a Marine Vietnam vet and a decorated Vietnam vet. And Peter tells the story much better than me, but like he's told it on an interview, and he's told it at Comic-Cons, and he straight out says it. He's like, my brother was staying with me. I was transitioning from sketch comedy and in front of the camera to voice acting. And he was like, I think he might have been the voice of Eeyore at that point. And he did, you know, Smurfs and a bunch of other stuff. I think he was the voice of Dr. Claw and Inspector Gadget as well. So he was like, already had some stuff going. and he was auditioning for a robot leader. And his brother was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm auditioning for this robot leader. And like his brother Larry was like, well, whatever you do, make him strong enough to be gentle. Don't have him yelling and screaming and the fake Hollywood stuff, and make him real. And Peter's like, yeah, I went to the audition booth, and literally, my brother came out, and like that, it was very strong enough to be gentle. And then a couple weeks later, he got a call from his agent. Yeah, you got the role as Optimus Prime. And he's like, okay. And so, he's been Optimus Prime for like 40 years now almost, which is great. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's somebody who I've gotten to talk with. And sometimes when we meet up or have coffee and stuff, kind of like having a great uncle or a grandfather figure or father figure, and we tell jokes, and he can do Donald Duck and all kinds of stuff. And that even being around him, I'm like, maybe I do need to get more into voice acting, even if that's just a side thing I do. But a lot of my heroes growing up they could do voice acting. They could, Robin Williams again, or Jonathan Winters did voice acting as well once he stopped doing stand up and being on like the Tonight Show and stuff. So that's definitely there. That's definitely like a passion of mine, and just, something I keep in my back pocket.
How's this strike impacting you in your work?
Well, I'm still non-union, so it's like I can still go do stuff. Friends of mine who are SAG, SAG auditions and stuff obviously are non-existent for me and for a lot of people, everybody. And it's just, there's people who are definitely struggling, and they're, even as a working actor, if you're making like, 25 or 50,000 a year or doing acting, it's like you're still gonna have a side job. Whether it's school teaching or whether it's consulting, running your own restaurant or whatever it is, it's like, unless you are like the upper 1% or something, it's like you're going to be working that extra job for a while, if not indefinitely. If it's your own business, okay, you're investing in yourself. But yeah, it's definitely impacting people, but it has to be done. I'm in support of it, and have support of my friends of doing it, because it's a real crux and a decision point at the industry, an inflection point that it's like, if actors don't negotiate for what's right and what keeps us working as artists, there may not be a place for us. Artificial intelligence is a real thing, and deep fakes are real. You see them on your Instagram, you see them on YouTube and Facebook and other places, TikTok, and it's like some of the stuff's pretty real, and you wouldn't have even seen that level of technology 20 or 25 years ago in a feature. And so they're doing it on your phone. It's like, okay, there's stuff that's even better than this out there, and it can. Maybe we'll see Hollywood class. Maybe Clark Gable will start being in films again, that would be scary,
But I would imagine at a more basic level, when you talk about being a screenwriter and wanting to write a screenplay, AI has to be, I'll call it daunting.
Oh yeah, it's daunting even to journalism, because some of the search engines are prioritizing AI written articles over articles, even if they're military based by veterans. Which I'm like, okay, wouldn't you want the nuance of a real veteran in this article? Wouldn't that add more than a machine that's letter perfect on grammar and punctuation and all that other stuff? It's like, but there's no voice to it, or the voice to it is that of a machine. And so, yeah, it is daunting. It is kind of like, the writers are in a similar position. Like, you can't, blinking is not really a win situation. I wouldn't say it's a no-win, but it's not going in the right direction. And knowing, people in the WGA, it's like they're up in arms over it, and it's kind of like, yeah, you're going to get, replaced by a machine. It's like, okay, that's not any good, and the residuals are cut out, and it's a much different ball game than it was, even in 2007, 2008. Completely different ball game than when people were still writing on typewriters and word processing machines and like early laptops in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Like that's a different world. So it's an inflection point, and the writers and actors have a 100% valid point, and many valid points. So yeah, I'm in support of both of them, and want to see the right thing done for my friends and for those colleagues and stuff that I've worked with.
How much longer you got in the reserves?
Well, it depends. If I stay in, up for promotion, and pending I'm lucky and blessed enough to get that, the idea would be 28, 30 years. If they keep promoting me, want to keep me in, I'd keep doing it. I'm still able to make a positive impact still.
28 or 30 years total, or 28 or 30 years more?
28 or 30 years total.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't. I've already got 16 in. They're not going to let me serve 46 years or something. I mean, unless I'm like chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or something, which I don't think that's.
But doing 30 is a potential for you.
Yes, I would keep the doorway open for that, or more. I mean, if you make the general officer level, like you can do longer than 30. And if I were prior enlisted, I could do probably longer than 30 as an officer, but I'm not. I joined at OCS. So yeah, 28, 30 years. I mean, I keep that option open. General Pace made a comment. I don't know if you know who he was or who he is. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the mid-2000s. He was a 4-star Marine general, very decorated Vietnam vet. Probably one of the more polished Marine officers, more polished people I've ever met. Like, you thought you were talking to like a senator or something. Like, on top of him being a general, so it's like he was very like distinct and eloquent. But also casual. Like, you'd have a beer with you and you're like, this guy is like a genius. And it's like, but he's also like talks like a Marine. He's kind of like my dad, or he has like a father sense to him. He made a comment. He said, I promised myself, and he was, I believe, a spiritual man as well. And he's like, I believe with my faith that, I was going to keep serving as long as I could. And he served a long time as a 4-star general in JCS. And being a Marine 4-star is very hard. And being JCS is even harder, or, very, very hard. And so he said that, and it made sense to me. Like, if I can still serve and still run the physical tests and, operate as a Marine and make a positive impact and be a mentor and help set the younger generation up for success, I'm going to keep doing that. And that's important to me. That's why I joined to begin with. That's what my family, I believe, joined for as well in World War II and Korea and Vietnam and even the Gulf War, all the way through. So it makes sense. There's a continuity, and I feel like I'm the continuity in that. So what else do you got?
That's it. I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I appreciate the knowledge that you imparted, and I wish you the best on your screenplay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here, and it's great to meet you, Paul, and get to sit down, and appreciate you having me here.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.